But it's funny you say the whole, maybe these people have a skill that you don't have, because I don't know how common, but I've definitely met a few people in my time who use that, oh God told me this, to justify actions. Then you kind of tilt your head a little bit, and you don't want to say, did he though? But you kind of feel it like in your bones. Like you're just like, why, right? Like there's just so many question marks.
So I'd say when I was younger, I
Mm-hmm.
tended to have more of that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
But at this stage in the game, I can almost, I don't know if I choose to believe this or what it is, but I sense that, okay, this person is actually convicted, genuinely convicted, that this is what they're supposed to do. And that leads me to question, what is the difference of you believing
Mm-hmm.
that God told you to do something versus God actually telling you to do something? Because we talk about religion and faith
Mm-hmm.
as a leap. It cannot be justified by pure logic.
Yeah.
Like no matter how much logic you add to it, there's always a leap. So
Yeah.
some people just choose to take a much larger leap, or like let me get further up to the top where I can see the other side,
Mhm.
and then I'll leap because it's closer.
Yeah, but I think the thing that we've always said though is, right, you need to be very self-critical about the leaps you're taking, because then you fall you could jump into literally traps, right? And to your point, you're talking about like, oh, people you've met who are just very convicted. I've met people who are very convicted, and you tell them like, are you, you maybe question them, and they'll go, you know what, I'll pray about it, and then they'll come back the next day and be like, yep, God told me, or this person, like whoever they were praying to was like, yeah, this is literally what I've been told. And you're just like, and again, you don't want to be that person to be like, no, but at the same time, it's like sometimes it doesn't also work like that, right? It goes back to the joke where I was telling you about the guy who's like, oh, it's flooding, and then he's like, oh, car comes by, and he goes, hey, get in the car, and he's like, no, God will save me. And then a boat comes by later, and he's like, no, God will save me. And then a helicopter, and then he dies, and then God's just like, what do you want from me? I sent you a car, a boat, and a helicopter. And like, it's like people are basically maybe expect it, so then they think and feel very convicted, but in the stuff they're just very self-confident.
So I look at that situation and I almost check it as how, in what scenario is what they're saying makes sense, right? Because someone who is secular or someone who hates God and hates religion could come up to you and be like, okay, so explain to me why you believe. And I think that question is very similar to the question you're asking this person, and it's just like different forms of belief, different levels of belief. In both cases, both of you could be just talking out of your ass and like not actually know, right?
Yeah.
So like I see myself in that person, and I also don't connect to that person all at the same time.
But again, there has to be some form of framework that you can kind of plug in a situation and say, okay, is this person doing or hearing it from God, or are they kind of just using that as a catalyst or a tool to go with what they want, right? Catalyst is the wrong word, definitely tool.
So like when people tell you, when people speak in tongues, or when people say the Spirit has moved them, how do you react to those people? Do you think all of them are being disingenuous?
No, not at all. But there's a difference between someone saying they've experienced that and someone else, like someone saying they've experienced, let's say, like, the gift of tongues, which I've heard, again, from my, like, what I've been told, when, as someone who is in, like, the vicinity, who just hears it happen, there's something, they say, angelic about it. Like, they can't, it's it's like a feeling, like, it's like almost like maybe a warm, something warm comes over you. Like, I don't know how to define it, but the point is, there's something that they say is undefinable, but they feel when they hear it. Then you have, again, someone else though who will say, again, I'm very much more specifically focused on people who would be like, let me pray about it, and then they go a couple days,
Mm.
and they're like, yeah, I'm very convicted. This is like
Yeah.
where I go, what was the process there? Like, what is, and probably like there are people again who are right and they are being told this is what it is, but there are also people who are just using that as a tool. So I'm more focused on that, right? Not so much someone telling me like they have gifted tongues or
Sure.
gifts like
Okay,
that, because
okay.
that to me it's
Let's-
like,
Then let me refocus on the
Yeah.
person that says, okay, I went and thought about it and God definitely wants me to do it,
yeah,
right? That person is kind of interesting to me because they can fall into one of two camps. Either they're unwilling to introspect and really question themselves out of fear of being wrong.
Mhm.
Because when you commit something, when you commit so hard to something, there is a massive element of fear that I just put all my eggs in the wrong basket. So I might as well pretend that I made the right choice, and that it's true. Like fear leads you to do some crazy things, right?
I think.
And now,
Sorry, I was gonna go back though. If you take a step back though, I was actually gonna use the fear. I was actually gonna bring up fear, but I was gonna use that as an element of when someone is genuinely feeling called, because when you feel like you're being called to do something, same thing. You fear being wrong. You fear that maybe you're not hearing it right. So you tread lightly. You don't then just punch through the door and go, yep, and then announce it too, especially to everyone. Nope, yep, this is what God wants. Instead, you're kind of like, I'm not sure, right? It kind of, to go biblical for a sec, like the Moses, right? The story, like the whole story of like, he hears a talking bush and then he's not like, yep, here we go. Like he's literally like, me? Like, are you sure? And then still the whole time being very like, what the heck? Why am I doing this? Right? In a way that kind of, that fear is a good indication that maybe somebody is actually on the right path, because they're being pushed into an uncomfortable position that they don't necessarily feel like they want to be in, versus the people who are very convicted and feel very excited about it. I'm not going to say every situation, but I think in a way that might be more of an indicator of someone who might not be fully being called. Maybe this is kind of a bold statement.
I'm making the claim. I'm not making the claim that they are being called. I'm making the claim that they are not being called.
Oh, okay.
And because that they've told everyone already.
Yeah.
God
Okay, so
spoke
we're
to
on the
me.
same page. Yeah. What I just said is what you
It's,
said. Okay, sorry.
Basically, what we're trying to say is fear is all around us. Like if you do
Mhm.
one thing, you get fear. Like fear gets you one way. If you do the other thing, fear gets you the other way.
Mhm.
The case that I brought up basically said you just proclaim to everyone that God and I are tight,
Mhm.
right? But now, if you have doubts about it, or if things are not going as planned, you're not going to tell everyone, oh, yeah, by the way, I just lied. Maybe God didn't talk to me.
Mhm.
Because how are we going to validate that anyways?
Yeah.
So that's where the fear of acknowledging that you're wrong comes from. And in your case, which I think both of us relate to more, is even when we know that we're being pushed in one way, or we're called to do, or we're meant to do this thing,
Mhm.
we will sort of drag our feet and be
Yep.
like, oh, maybe not, it can be me, right? And in both cases, fear is the thing that's trying to like rule you, and in both cases you need to find the right answer, and it's hard in both ways.
Yeah, but I would say it's less hard for the former. I think when you're um confident enough to just kind of, like you said, announce into the world, the fear of being wrong in the end wasn't that big of a fear, or you wouldn't have said it in the first place, right?
Let me question. I think I want to bring this person out, like flesh them out a little more.
Okay.
So I'm almost asking, like, what are their motivations for claiming that God spoke to them? That tends to come from a place of insecurity or pridefulness, or
Just
it's like, I need to
genuine
feel more
excitement. If we
special.
want to be more positive, you can say genuine excitement. They're genuinely excited by
Okay.
what they think God's calling them
But
towards.
see, it's different. If you're genuinely excited,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that you're unwilling to admit when you're wrong. I'm talking about someone who proclaims that,
Mhm.
yeah, God told me to do this and we're tight. And now that you realize, oh, maybe not, the person who is prideful, the person who is insecure about being left out,
Mhm.
that person will cling to that even more. Because if they don't have this special relationship, what do they have?
I agree with that. That's fair.
Right? And that's where the fear sort of eats away at you.
So you're saying, but like, I guess going back to what you're saying, then you're saying that's harder, or just
I'm
as
not
hard, or
claiming, I'm
not
claiming
harder.
in
Sorry,
both
you did.
cases are
Yeah.
hard. But you claim that it's easier for the person who just openly claims it, and I'm saying, why are they not admitting their flaws?
Sorry, I don't. Maybe I did, but I think I'm more like, I'm not really here to argue, or I don't really care to argue which one's easier or harder. I think I was looking more for indicator. Um, the person who is afraid to kind of even publicly address, or even for themselves, like personally believe that they are being called to something. I think that fear is a good indicator of probably being called to do something, potentially. Not all the time, but because the idea is that it's uncomfortable, and you're not you're so uncertain, which is usually what God wants, right? He wants to push you into uncomfortable positions to make you grow. Again, the Moses story.
And even if you want to remove the God factor and just talk about human psychology, there, it's pushing out of your comfort zone.
Is growth in general.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you are gonna question yourself. You're going to be very ambivalent and what if I mess everything up? What if the things I already have are going to crumble as a result of this action? I completely see that. Yeah. So it's a valid fear most times, but the whole paralysis by analysis, right? The more I sit down and think about it, the more I'm actually moving away from what I'm supposed to do.